The letter arrived on a dreary November morning, its parchment yellowed and edges frayed, as if it had traversed decades to reach me. The ink was a deep crimson, the handwriting an elegant script that spoke of a bygone era.
Dear Mr. Carter, I hope this letter finds you in good health. I am Dr. Elias Thornton, a historian at Ashwood University. My research has led me to your grandfather, Professor Silas Carter, who vanished under mysterious circumstances in our town 40 years ago. Recent developments compel me to seek your assistance. I believe your grandfather's disappearance is linked to an ancient secret buried beneath our town's chapel. Please come to Ashwood at your earliest convenience. Yours sincerely, Dr. Elias Thornton.
The mention of my grandfather sent a shiver down my spine. Professor Silas Carter had been a man of great intellect and curiosity, traits that had led him to the obscure town of Ashwood in search of archaic knowledge. His sudden disappearance had cast a long shadow over our family, a mystery that had remained unsolved for decades. I had been a child when he vanished, but the memories were vivid. The hushed conversations, the frantic searches, and the eventual resignation that he was lost to us forever. The only relic of his ill-fated expedition was his journal, found near the outskirts of Ashwood, its pages filled with cryptic entries about the maw beneath and whispers in the dark. Despite the passage of time, the enigma of his disappearance had always lingered at the back of my mind. And now, this letter rekindled the embers of that old mystery. Compelled by a mixture of familial duty and insatiable curiosity, I packed my belongings and boarded the next train to Ashwood. The journey was long and monotonous, the landscape gradually transforming from bustling cities to desolate countryside. As the train chugged along, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far greater and far more sinister than I could comprehend. Upon arrival, Ashwood greeted me with an oppressive silence. The town seemed frozen in time, its cobblestone streets and antiquated buildings bearing the weight of centuries. The air was thick with an unidentifiable scent, a blend of damp earth and decaying foliage. I made my way to Ashwood University, a grand edifice that stood as a testament to the town's erstwhile prominence. Its stone facade was covered in ivy, and the gargoyles perched atop seemed to watch my every move with hollow eyes. Dr. Thornton awaited me in his office, a cluttered room filled with towering stacks of books and ancient artifacts. He was a gaunt man, his face lined with the marks of relentless scholarship, and his eyes gleamed with a fervor that bordered on obsession.
Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. Your grandfather's work has been the cornerstone of my research. I believe we are on the brink of uncovering a truth that transcends our understanding.
He motioned for me to sit, and without preamble, delved into the heart of the matter.
Ashwood is built upon ancient grounds, predating even the earliest settlements.
He began.
Beneath the old chapel lies a network of catacombs, remnants of a civilization lost to history. Your grandfather theorized that these catacombs house the Maw, an entity described in forbidden texts as an insatiable abyss, a gateway to realms beyond our comprehension.
He handed me a faded manuscript, its pages brittle and covered in esoteric symbols.
This is the scripture of the Black Blood, a tome your grandfather sought. It speaks of rituals and sacrifices to appease the Maw, to prevent it from consuming our world.
As I perused the text, a sense of unease settled over me. The illustrations depicted grotesque beings emerging from a gaping chasm, surrounded by figures in hooded robes. The accompanying passages spoke of the awakening, a prophecy foretelling the return of the Maw if certain conditions were met.
Recently,
Dr. Thornton continued,
there have been occurrences. Townsfolk hearing whispers, experiencing vivid nightmares, and some have gone missing. I fear the seal that binds the Maw is weakening.
A chill ran down my spine as I recalled my grandfather's journal entries, the frantic scrawls about voices in the dark and an all-consuming hunger beneath the earth.
We must venture into the catacombs.
Dr. Thornton declared, his voice resolute.
We need to uncover the truth and, if possible, reinforce the seal. Will you join me?
Despite the dread gnawing at my insides, I found myself nodding. The desire to uncover my grandfather's fate and the gravity of the situation propelled me forward. Little did I know, we were about to step into a nightmare from which there might be no return. The following morning, Dr. Thornton and I stood before the old chapel, its weathered facade bearing the scars of time. The air was thick with an unidentifiable scent, a blend of damp earth and decaying foliage.
The entrance to the catacombs lies within,
Dr. Thornton murmured, his voice tinged with both excitement and trepidation. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, we were greeted by the musty scent of neglect. Dust danced in the beams of sunlight that pierced through the broken stained glass windows. At the far end of the chapel, beneath a faded mural of somber saints, lay a stone altar. Dr. Thornton approached the altar, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings that adorned its surface. With a firm press on one of the symbols, the Ouroboros, the altar shifted, revealing a dark, yawning passage beneath.
After you.
He gestured, handing me a lantern. Taking a deep breath, I descended the narrow staircase, the walls closing in around me. The flickering light cast eerie shadows, and the air grew colder with each step. At the base of the stairs, we entered a vast chamber, the ceiling lost to darkness. The walls were lined with alcoves, each housing ancient, crumbling statues of grotesque figures, beings with elongated limbs, multiple eyes, and other features that defied human anatomy.
These must be depictions of the old ones,
Dr. Thornton whispered, his eyes wide with awe. As we ventured deeper, the oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of our footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The passages twisted and turned, forming a labyrinth that seemed to defy logic. Suddenly, a faint whisper reached my ears, a susurrus of voices speaking in a language I couldn't comprehend. I halted, straining to listen. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Thornton nodded, his face pale.
The townsfolk spoke of whispers in the dark. It's said that those who hear them are marked.
A chill ran down my spine as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The walls seemed to pulse, the grotesque carvings appearing to writhe in the lantern's light. We pressed on, the atmosphere growing heavier, as if the very air resisted our intrusion. The passage opened into another chamber, dominated by a massive stone door, its surface etched with more of the esoteric symbols from the scripture of the Black Blood. Dr. Thornton produced the tome from his satchel, flipping through the pages until he found the corresponding symbols.
This appears to be a seal,
he murmured.
a barrier to keep something contained.
Before I could respond, the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, and the ground beneath us trembled. The lantern flickered, casting frantic shadows on the walls. "We need to leave," I urged, panic rising in my chest. But as we turned to retrace our steps, the passage behind us had vanished, replaced by a solid wall of stone. Trapped, we faced the ominous door once more.
There's no other way.
Dr. Thornton said, determination in his eyes.
We must go forward.
With trembling hands, he pressed the symbols on the door in the sequence indicated by the tome. The ground shook violently, and the door slowly creaked open, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Steeling ourselves, we stepped into the abyss, unaware of the horrors that awaited us beyond the threshold. As we crossed the threshold into the darkness beyond the stone door, the temperature plummeted, and an oppressive weight seemed to settle upon us. The lantern's feeble glow barely penetrated the inky blackness, casting flickering shadows that danced menacingly along the rough-hewn walls. The passageway sloped downward, the air growing thicker with each step, carrying a fetid odor that churned my stomach. The whispers we had heard earlier now coalesced into a low, rhythmic chant, reverberating through the stone and resonating deep within my bones. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Dr. Thornton nodded, his face pale and drawn.
It's as the text described. a congregation in supplication to the Maw.
We pressed on, the passageway opening into a vast cavernous chamber that defied comprehension. The ceiling stretched beyond the reach of our light, and the walls were adorned with grotesque carvings depicting scenes of worship and sacrifice to eldritch beings. At the center of the chamber lay a massive chasm, its edges lined with ancient runes that pulsed with a sickly, greenish light. The chanting emanated from this abyss, a chorus of voices both human and otherworldly, merging into a dissonant harmony that set my teeth on edge. Dr. Thornton approached the edge of the chasm, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror.
This is it.
He breathed.
The Maw, the gateway to the realms beyond our understanding.
As I joined him, peering into the abyss, I felt an overwhelming sense of vertigo, as if the void were reaching out to swallow me whole. The darkness within seemed alive, swirling and shifting with a malevolent intelligence. Suddenly, the chanting ceased, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. The air grew still, and an oppressive sense of dread settled over us. "We shouldn't be here," I muttered, taking a step back. Before Dr. Thornton could respond, a deep, rumbling growl emanated from the chasm, shaking the very ground beneath our feet. The runes flared brightly, casting eerie shadows that writhed and twisted like living things. From the depths of the abyss, a massive, tentacled appendage emerged, its surface glistening with a viscous, black ichor. It writhed and lashed, as if tasting the air, before retreating back into the darkness. "We need to leave," I urged, panic rising in my chest. Dr. Thornton tore his gaze from the chasm, nodding absently.
Yes, of course.
As we turned to retrace our steps, the ground beneath us trembled violently, and the walls of the chamber began to close in, the carvings contorting into grotesque visages of agony and despair. We stumbled through the narrowing passageway, the lantern flickering precariously, casting fleeting glimpses of the horrors that pursued us. Shapeless entities that slithered and oozed from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. Our flight was a blur of terror and desperation, the boundaries between reality and nightmare dissolving into a cacophony of whispers and screams. Just as it seemed the darkness would consume us entirely, we burst through the stone door, collapsing onto the cold, hard floor of the previous chamber. The door slammed shut behind us with a resounding boom, the runes upon its surface dimming to a faint glow. Gasping for breath, we lay there in stunned silence, the enormity of what we had witnessed weighing heavily upon us.
The seal is weakening.
Dr. Thornton murmured, his voice barely audible.
The Maw is awakening.
A chill ran down my spine as I realized the gravity of our situation. The entity beneath Ashwood was stirring, and its hunger threatened to consume not just the town, but the very fabric of our reality. We had to find a way to restore the seal and prevent the Maw from breaking free. But time was running out, and the shadows were closing in. The oppressive weight of our recent encounter with the Maw hung heavily between Dr. Thornton and me as we retraced our steps through the labyrinthine catacombs. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the distant whispers had grown louder, more insistent, echoing off the damp stone walls. Our lantern flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. Each step forward felt like a descent deeper into madness, the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurring with every passing moment. As we rounded a corner, we stumbled upon a chamber that had previously escaped our notice. The walls were adorned with ancient carvings, depicting scenes of worship and sacrifice to eldritch beings that defied comprehension. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a weathered tome bound in what appeared to be human skin. Dr. Thornton approached the pedestal with a reverence reserved for sacred relics. His fingers trembled as he opened the tome, revealing pages filled with cryptic symbols and illustrations of grotesque creatures.
This is the Codex Maleficarum,
he whispered, his voice tinged with awe and fear.
a grimoire thought lost to time, detailing rituals to commune with the old ones.
A chill ran down my spine as I peered over his shoulder, the grotesque illustrations seeming to writhe on the page.
We must take this with us.
Dr. Thornton declared, closing the tome and placing it carefully into his satchel.
It may hold the key to understanding the maw and how to seal it once more.
As we turned to leave, a low growl resonated through the chamber, the very walls vibrating with its intensity. The temperature plummeted, and our breath hung in the air like ghostly apparitions. From the shadows emerged a figure draped in tattered robes, its face obscured by a hood. The stench of decay intensified, and the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm our senses.
He dares to disturb the sanctum of the maw.
The figure intoned, its voice a guttural rasp that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the abyss. Dr. Thornton stepped forward, his demeanor a mix of defiance and fear.
We seek to understand the maw and prevent its awakening. Too long has it threatened our world.
A chilling laugh echoed through the chamber, the figure's shoulders shaking with mirth.
Fools.
It spat.
The maw's hunger is eternal. It cannot be sated, nor can it be sealed by the likes of you.
Before we could react, the figure raised a skeletal hand, and the ground beneath us trembled. The walls seemed to close in, the carvings distorting into grotesque visages of torment. A sense of impending doom washed over me, and I felt the icy tendrils of despair clutch at my heart. But Dr. Thornton stood firm, his eyes blazing with determination.
We will not be deterred.
He declared, his voice steady despite the terror that surrounded us.
The knowledge contained within the Codex will guide us. We will find a way to seal the maw and end its threat once and for all.
The figure hissed, retreating into the shadows, its parting words a chilling whisper.
The maw awaits and it will consume all.
With renewed urgency, we fled the chamber. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but we were resolute in our mission. The fate of Ashwood, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance. The weight of our discovery pressed heavily upon us as we navigated the labyrinthine catacombs beneath Ashwood. The air grew colder, and the oppressive darkness seemed to close in, as if the very walls conspired to keep us from escaping. Dr. Thornton clutched the Codex Maleficarum to his chest, his eyes darting nervously at every shadow. The whispers that had once been distant murmurs now echoed around us, a cacophony of malevolent voices that threatened to overwhelm our sanity.
We must find the chamber described in the Codex.
Dr. Thornton muttered, his voice trembling.
It's there that we can perform the ritual to seal the maw.
I nodded, though doubt gnawed at my resolve. The horrors we had witnessed, the grotesque carvings, the eldritch entities, had shaken me to my core. Yet, the thought of allowing the maw to awaken fully, to unleash its insatiable hunger upon our world, propelled me forward. After what felt like hours of wandering through the twisting passages, we arrived at a massive stone door, its surface etched with the same arcane symbols that adorned the pages of the Codex. The air here was thick with an unidentifiable scent, a blend of damp earth and decaying foliage.
This is it.
Dr. Thornton whispered, his hand trembling as he traced the symbols on the door.
The chamber of sealing.
With great effort, we pushed the door open, revealing a vast chamber illuminated by an eerie, greenish light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. At the center of the room lay a circular platform, surrounded by ancient runes that pulsed rhythmically, as if alive. Dr. Thornton approached the platform, carefully placing the Codex upon it. He flipped through the brittle pages until he found the ritual, his eyes scanning the text with feverish intensity.
We must begin at once,
he said, his voice steadying with determination.
The ritual requires both of us to recite the incantation while standing within the circle of runes.
As we stepped into the circle, a low hum resonated through the chamber, the runes glowing brighter in response. We began to chant the incantation, the unfamiliar words rolling off our tongues, filling the air with a palpable energy. The ground beneath us trembled, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to intensify, pressing down upon us like a physical weight. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the very fabric of reality protested our actions. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through the chamber, and from the shadows emerged a monstrous entity, a mass of writhing tentacles and gnashing maws, its form defying all logic and reason. The very sight of it threatened to shatter my sanity, my mind struggling to comprehend the abomination before me.
Don't falter.
Dr. Thornton shouted over the cacophony, his voice filled with a resolve I envied.
We must complete the ritual.
Drawing upon every ounce of willpower, I continued the incantation, my voice trembling but unbroken. The entity lashed out, its tentacles striking the invisible barrier formed by the circle of runes, each impact sending shockwaves through the chamber. As our chanting reached its crescendo, the runes flared with blinding light, and a piercing scream filled the air, a sound that seemed to come from both the entity and the very walls around us. The creature writhed in agony, its form contorting and shrinking, as if being pulled into itself. With one final, ear-splitting shriek, the entity collapsed into a singular point of darkness before vanishing entirely. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting, leaving us gasping for breath. Dr. Thornton sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face.
We did it.
He whispered, a mixture of relief and exhaustion in his voice.
The maw is sealed once more.
As I helped him to his feet, a sense of profound accomplishment washed over me. We had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious. Yet, deep down, I knew that the knowledge of what lurked beneath Ashwood, the eldritch horrors that defied comprehension, would haunt me for the rest of my days. But for now, the town was safe, and the whispers had ceased. And that was enough. The oppressive silence of the sealed chamber weighed heavily upon us, but the knowledge that we had prevented the maw's awakening offered a fleeting sense of relief. Dr. Thornton and I retraced our steps through the catacombs, our movements sluggish from exhaustion and the lingering dread of our ordeal. Emerging into the pale light of dawn, Ashwood appeared unchanged, a quaint town oblivious to the horrors lurking beneath its surface. Yet, as we walked its streets, an unsettling feeling gnawed at me, as if unseen eyes tracked our every move. Days turned into weeks, and life in Ashwood resumed its mundane rhythm. However, Dr. Thornton and I were irrevocably altered. Our nights were plagued by nightmares, visions of writhing tentacles and abyssal voids that left us drenched in cold sweat. One evening, as we pored over the Codex Maleficarum in search of reassurance that the seal would hold, a knock echoed through Dr. Thornton's study. We exchanged wary glances before he rose to answer. At the door stood a hunched figure, cloaked in shadows. Its voice, a guttural rasp, sent chills down my spine.
You meddle in forces beyond your comprehension.
It hissed.
The maw's hunger is eternal, and it shall not be denied.
Before we could react, the figure vanished into the night, leaving only the echo of its ominous warning. Fear tightened its grip on my heart, and I saw the same terror reflected in Dr. Thornton's eyes. Determined to protect Ashwood, we sought allies among scholars and occultists, sharing our tale and the knowledge contained within the Codex. Some dismissed us as madmen, while others listened with grave concern. One such ally, Professor Eleanor Hawthorne, proposed a ritual to strengthen the seal, a perilous endeavor that required venturing once more into the catacombs. Despite our trepidation, we agreed, knowing the alternative was unthinkable. As we descended into the depths beneath Ashwood, the air grew thick with malevolence. The whispers returned, more insistent than before, and the walls seemed to pulse with a sinister life. At the sealed chamber, we formed a circle, chanting the incantations Professor Hawthorne had prepared. The atmosphere grew heavy, and a palpable tension filled the air. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a deafening roar echoed through the catacombs. The seal before us glowed with an otherworldly light, straining against the forces pressing from the other side. With a final, unified shout, we completed the ritual. The light intensified, then abruptly extinguished, leaving us in darkness. The oppressive presence receded, and an eerie calm settled over the chamber. Exhausted but resolute, we made our way back to the surface. Ashwood remained peaceful, its residents blissfully unaware of the abyss that had nearly consumed them. Yet, as I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me. The whispers had ceased, but their memory lingered, a haunting reminder of the fragile barrier between our world and the unfathomable horrors beyond. In the quiet moments before dawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that our victory was temporary, that the Maw's insatiable hunger would one day return. And when it did, would we be prepared to face it once more? If this tale of eldritch horror and the thin veil between our world and the unknown has sent shivers down your spine, please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss another chilling story. Thanks for watching The Cabin of Whispers. See you next time.